Henry, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. This is a quick look at Nigel Farage, what he said about having more children.
We want to go much, much further to encourage people to have children, to make it easier for them to have children. And that is why I also believe that having a transferable tax allowance between married people is the right thing to do. Now, I know many will say, look, marriage is outdated, most people don't bother to get married anymore, and you know, I'm hardly standing here in front of you as a religious priest and moralising. I'm not sure my own track record was ever so good on this, and we all lead imperfect lives. But what is true, what is absolutely true, and the evidence is there to prove it, is that where people who are married stay together for the longest period of time, the children that grow up in those environments have the best chance of success in life.
He says these things as though nobody's said them for a very long time, and nobody has said them for a very long time, Henry. The question, I suppose, is he right?
I mean, on the impact of raising children in marriage, that does certainly seem to be something that is attested to by the evidence. Of course, there is a chicken and egg argument about, well, if you made people who didn't want to be together stay together, would that be as healthy and happy an environment for children? But broadly speaking, children raised in a stable home with two parents do best. And so encouraging that to an extent, if people have children, makes perfect sense. I think the query maybe on this particular part of his proposals is simply the extent to which he's really doing that. He is proposing a tax break for married couples, but it really isn't all that big in the scope of the overall proposals that he's suggesting. I think reformers suggest saying that they'll raise the personal allowance to 20,000 per person, and then in a married couple, one will be able to claim it up to 25,000. So that is effectively, if you're a cohabiting couple, I think if you're a basic rate taxpayers, you'd be saving about £3,000. If you were a married couple, you'd be saving just under £4,000. So it's a difference, but not as vast a difference as maybe some of his rhetoric suggested it might be.
No, sure. And a lot of people telling me this morning as well, it's not simply about being given, you know, a bit more cash, if you like, as a benefit. It might be better to be more of an incentive, for example, like it used to be the case where you would get a married couple's allowance, or you would get money as a tax break, if you like, if you had an extra child, rather than actually a benefit. You know what I mean? I know it's a subtle difference, but also people telling me this morning that a lot of people aren't having the number of children as they used to have is simply because the cost of living is so high, they can't necessarily be sure they can afford a house, and they're being squeezed out of the rental market by a lot of people coming into this country being given free housing.
Yeah, exactly. There are all sorts of reasons, but the cost of living is a really big one. And also simply the cost of getting into your own home, because if you're stuck renting, then that's a huge amount of uncertainty. You only have, you only know where you're living year to year.
Yeah.
If you're about to bring a young child into the world, you don't want to risk being forced into a smaller flat or constantly having to move around all the time.
Yeah.
So there are an enormous range of factors that go into this. But I do think that one very important thing about this, maybe the gap, I completely agree with Nigel. We do need lots more children. Fundamentally, the British state, most states, in fact, operate as a sort of Ponzi scheme, essentially, because they need people paying in to pay out the benefits to older citizens who've started to retire. And so we need those people. And if we want less immigration, which most people do, the overwhelming majority of people do, then we need people to have children. But we should be targeting those programs at working families. As you say, that could be done through a tax break. The slight irony of the current proposal is that the two-child limit only applies to people on universal credit. And so this is a proposal which won't do anything if you're a family having to make a difficult decision about whether or not you can afford a first or a second child, and you're a sort of net contributor taxpayer who pays into the economy and pays into the exchequer and pays for everything else. And those are the people who have been left out.
And it's the working poor again, isn't it? And I know that, as you say, I mean, some of the benefit system in this country is supposed to help the working poor, but it sort of doesn't really. It helps a section of them, but the most difficult place to be, it seems to be, in this country, is to be just high enough paid to be above the threshold for getting help from the government, but not actually well enough off to be able to afford to do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Only about 1/3 of British adults are actually net contributors to the economy in general. So there is to the tax man in general, and those people carry an enormous burden. And think the most interesting thing is sometimes when we talk about having more babies, there's concerns in some quarters that it's people talking about forcing women to have children that they don't want to have and all the rest of it. But this country has a quite clear baby gap, which is the difference between the average birth rate that we currently have, which is 1.49, and the number of children that British women say that they'd like to have. Now, according to the latest research that I've seen, more than 80% of British women who responded to it said that they wanted at least 2 children. So actually, there's a clear failure here in that we have British people who want to have families, who want to have larger families than they end up with, and they're not being able to have them. And we need policy interventions that are aimed at making that more possible. And not all of them will cost money. There's a lot of debate about the cost of some of these policies, and some of them are expensive. But deregulating childcare, not completely deregulating it, having CRB checks and so on is fine, but getting rid of some of the absurd requirements we've freighted onto that in recent years, making a childcare credit into something which parents can spend more flexibly rather than only spending on government-approved providers, which is making everything very expensive. Those would actually be cost neutral, and they could hugely give more flexibility to parents. So there are all kinds of things we can do. Hopefully, Farage's announcements today are just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, indeed. I'll leave you with this final 20 minutes ago tweet from the Prime Minister. I'm going to call this his lie of the day, because he does at least 1 or 2 of these every single day. Working people deserve to realise the dream of owning their own home. My government is taking action to make this happen. Local builders will face simpler rules, faster decisions and less red tape, helping them get on with building the homes that communities need. Well, sounds good, doesn't it?
It sounds absolutely amazing until you actually see the detail of what Labour is proposing. They're basically, this is true for small developers of up to 9 houses. Small developments, they've created a simpler rule system. But what they're proposing for big developments is absolutely mad.
Yeah.
They're proposing effectively that councils will be able to decide how quickly a developer should build out, and then are completely free to do that without any control from the government. And then if the developer fails to do that, they can seize the land and refuse to take further planning applications from that developer. So it's on the one hand, for tiny developments, yep, Starmer's got your back. For big ones, the Labour government's proposing to make it just about impossible to build them. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is, along with everything else they're doing. Great to talk to you, Henry. Great piece in the paper today. Thank you. Henry Hill, political commentator. Big piece in page 12 of The Sun this morning.